The Pentagon may be in trouble, but it's nothing compared to the White House. I'm talking about the debt ceiling. There is still no progress. It's the most nervous build-up for a climax we already know. There will be a deal. The only question is, who will blink first? Joe Biden or his Republican opposition? House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says a deal has not been reached, but they will keep working until there is an agreement.
We're not there yet. So, I mean, it's difficult because you've got to be able to, you take a couple days to write the bill, you got 72 hours here, then you got the Senate to act.
And what is the White House saying? They said Tuesday's talks were productive. They also said that a default was off the table. Listen to this.
They both reiterated that default is off the table and only way forward is in good faith and toward a bipartisan budget agreement.
This deadlock has consequences. American stocks closed in the red on Tuesday. Even Indian markets felt the heat. The Sensex dropped 200 points in today's trade. This is what many experts had warned about, that a deal will be reached, but the damage will be done by then. Markets do not really look at political games. They're only concerned about sentiment. In this case, the mood is of uncertainty. One victim of this uncertainty could be the Indian rupee. Experts say the rupee could slip further. And why is that? Because there is more demand for the dollar. The greenback is considered a safe haven, meaning it can withstand economic shocks and uncertainty, which is what investors are looking for. They're spooked by the looming debt deadline. So they are betting on the US dollar, and the rupee could be the collateral. It is trading at 82.66 compared to 82.80 in the previous session, which is good, but it opened higher at 82.83. Now, some outside factors helped the rupee today, but that may not be the case tomorrow because we are expecting more news from the US, this time from the Federal Reserve, their central bank. Minutes from their monthly meeting will be released overnight, and that could influence the markets. There are two possibilities on the table. The Fed can either increase rates again or they can hit the pause button. There have been 10 consecutive interest hikes since last year. So a pause would signal a policy shift. Experts are predicting a 30% chance of rate hike in June. But coming back to the rupee, how will a weaker rupee hurt you and me? Through our imports. When India buys commodities, it uses American dollars. If the dollar is more expensive, our imports cost more. In one word, inflation. So should you be worried? Well, not yet. The Reserve Bank of India seems to have a red line for the rupee. That's 83 against the dollar. So chances are they will intervene to protect that red line. The RBI did it last year as well. But like we keep saying, this is all unnecessary. The debt ceiling is a made-up problem, like a mock United Nations or a costume competition. All this talk is for a problem that should not even technically exist. But that's the United States for you. They sneeze, but you catch the cold. A perfect storm is brewing in America. The US government might soon run out of cash. Investors are preparing for a government default. And if that wasn't enough, now doubts are being raised over American warplanes. A big lapse has come to light at the Pentagon. Spare parts worth millions of dollars are missing. They're unaccounted for. And the Pentagon cannot come up with an explanation. Which parts are these? They are for the F-35 fighter jet, the most advanced warplane in the world. Also America's most important weapon as of today. If there's a war, if there's a need to demonstrate air power, the F-35 will be seen in action. But to keep that warplane ready for battle, the US must maintain an inventory for spare parts. Recently, this inventory was audited, and it was found that thousands of parts were missing. In fact, I have some numbers. More than 1 million spare parts of the F-35 have been lost. Do you know how much they're worth? More than $85 million, and that's just the loss from one contractor. So the actual loss could be much higher, and it's hard to come up with an estimate. Do you know why? Because the Pentagon doesn't keep any books. There are no records. The US government has no way to track where the parts are going. Remember, we're talking about the world's most powerful military with the biggest budget and supposedly the best technology. But they cannot explain where their parts are going. How difficult is it to maintain an Excel sheet? Well, it turns out they did not have one in the first place. And this is quite a mess. Do you know how the US manages these spare parts? They have a single consolidated pool. It is used by America and its allies. Now, how many countries use the F-35? Apart from the US, at least 8 others. As of 2020, these countries used the fighter jet F-35. The United Kingdom, Italy, the Netherlands, Australia, Norway, Israel, Japan, and South Korea. They were all operating the F-35. Of course, America has sold these planes to more countries than these, but they don't own any spare parts. All of them depend on American supplies, at least on paper. When they need a spare part, like engines, tires, landing gears, bolts, screws, fasteners, they turn to the US, and they have those parts delivered. Now, this inventory or central pool is massive. It is spread out across the world. Reports say the parts are held in more than 50 locations across the world. They could be inside facilities of subcontractors or US military bases, both at home and abroad, or even facilities of foreign partners. And who makes these planes? A company called Lockheed Martin. The US government relies on this company to also keep track of the parts. But like I said, a recent audit showed that parts are missing. The Pentagon was asked about this, and they couldn't explain it. The Pentagon has an F-35 program office, an entire department looking after all things F-35. Reports say they don't have any accountability over the parts. What's worse, this is not a first. For at least 5 years now, the US military has been failing this accountability audit. 5 years, and they haven't been able to get this right. Although they have started keeping some records now, but the entire process is riddled with holes. In fact, let me quote from the last audit. This is what it says. Although the F-35 program office has taken initial steps to establish property records after spending approximately $12 million to conduct the inventory, it was unable to provide the cost, total quantity, and locations of spare parts in the global spares pool. As a result of this lack of accountability, the total value and quantity of the spare parts is currently unknown. Meaning, they don't know how many spare parts are there and how much they're worth. Perhaps more than new weapons, the US military needs some accountants. The way they're going, it won't inspire confidence among allies. Look at how America is poised today. They're locked in a proxy war against Russia, whether they admit to it or not. And they're locked in an escalating Cold War with the Chinese. America may not go into battle directly anytime soon, but it must be prepared for one. As of today, it doesn't look prepared. Let me show you another report. This is from November last year. It says US warplanes are not combat ready. Only 4 out of 49 warplanes met combat requirements. And our new report says they have 1 million spare parts missing and they don't know where they went. How would you assess a force like this? We'd like to hear from you. For our last story tonight, let's try to lighten the mood a bit. Here are some questions for you. Why was the DJ a hit at vegetable parties? Because she dropped good beats. Why did the carrot go to the hairdressers? Its roots were showing. Why did the gossipy chef get fired? He couldn't stop spilling the beans. By now, you have probably guessed what our next story is about. It's about vegetables. But if these veggie jokes improved your mood, try eating more vegetables, because that will actually make you happier. And study after study says so. What we eat affects how we feel. So we can eat ourselves happy by consuming more greens. Let us tell you why. Pardon the pun. Here's a report.
Eat your greens, kids. How many times have you heard that before? Don't worry, we aren't here to force you to finish your broccoli. We'll just tell you why you should. Because what we stick in our mouths matters to our mental health. When we're feeling down, we gravitate towards junk food. When you're feeling blue, nothing tastes as good as that burger. But what we should be doing is the exact opposite. You should be eating greens instead to stay in the pink of health. For years, studies have said that eating vegetables can improve physical health. But did you know that they also improve our mental health? And it doesn't take much. Adding just one more serving of fruits or vegetables will do the trick. But if you need more reason to believe us, here are some recent findings for you. A study says higher consumption of fruits means more relaxation, confidence, and energy. Another study says 5 servings of vegetables a day not just keeps the doctor away, but also lowers the risk of depression by 19%. Eating 4 portions of fruits lowers the risk of depression by 25%. 18 studies have found that for every 100 grams of veggies, depression risks drop by at least 3%. And all of these findings are just the tip of the iceberg lettuce. We can keep going, but the crux of it all is this: fruit and vegetable consumption is linked to mental well being. There are some differences though. Like in some countries, this link between greens and well being is stronger than others. For example, in India, Russia, China, and Ghana. That's because of diet patterns that involve more vegetables or a healthier preparation style. What's more, vegans and vegetarians are less depressed than omnivores. Now, some studies contradict this fact, but most of them are funded by the meat industry. So, you get the idea. No matter the differences, vegetables make us happier. Question is, how? The obvious reason is substitution. When we load up on plants, our stomachs have less space for unhealthy foods, which are bad for our mental health. Sweets make us more nervous and panicky. They also make us feel hopeless. Junk food increases our risk of depression by 23%. So clearly, comfort food is discomforting in reality. Plants also give us more fiber. You already knew that. And fiber is good not just for the body, but also great for the brain, as it releases happy hormones like dopamine and serotonin. These regulate our mood and make us feel motivated. So, how do we make the switch? Start small by adding more vegetables and fruits to your meals. But if you don't like to eat vegetables, try experimenting. Have a rainbow diet, foods of different colors. Or try adding different herbs and spices. Because experts say any vegetable can be made delicious, even Brussels sprouts. You can even have fresh fruit juice. It's tasty and healthy. So find your own rhythm and slowly develop the habit of having more veggies. Take a stab at that Caesar salad. Or just keep calm and carry on.
For our next story, let's talk about misery. They say misery loves company, and these days, miserable countries have lots of company. The distress of some is off the charts, but just enough to quantify. We're talking about the Misery Index. It has analyzed 157 countries and ranked them in order of how miserable they are. Zimbabwe has topped the list. It's a country in Africa home to about 16 million people. It has topped this list for 3 straight years now. Where does India stand? At number 103. And how is this list created? What can countries learn from it? Our next report tells you.
Misery finds most company in Zimbabwe. This African nation is home to about 16 million people, and it has been named the world's most miserable country. But we aren't saying this. The Misery Index is. It is formally called Hankey's Annual Misery Index. How does it work? It's an economic index. This index analyzes 157 countries, then gives a score to each of them. This score is based on unemployment, inflation, bank lending rates, and percentage change in GDP. This year's index has now been released, and top of this honor roll is Zimbabwe. The index blames the country's political turmoil for this. It says that Zimbabwe is mired in corruption. This has only aggravated a deepening economic crisis, and its troubles don't end there. Violence is rampant and widespread. Tens of thousands are descending into poverty. So all this doom has made Zimbabwe the gloomiest nation to live in. Who's next? Venezuela, Syria, Lebanon, and Sudan. For Syria, it's their unemployment that is making it miserable. Not to mention its horrific civil war, which has been on for over a decade. As for the other 3 nations, Venezuela, Lebanon, and Sudan, inflation is the biggest reason for their sad state of being. Where's India in all this? It stands at number 103. The main reason for this is unemployment. What about neighboring Pakistan? It's dealing with both economic and political crisis, and it's only worsening by the day. The country ranks at 35. Yes, Pakistan is in the top 40 most miserable countries in the world. But that's no shocker. Here's one which might surprise you. Finland. It's the world's happiest country, yet it ranks 109th. Ironic, isn't it? But the fact is that the miserable index is about economic factors, which are connected to people's happiness. But they are not the only factors which bring us joy. As they say, money doesn't buy happiness. Let's put you out of your misery now and talk about the least miserable country in the world. It's Switzerland. We suspect the chocolates and cheese have something to do with it. Kuwait, Ireland, Japan and Malaysia make up the top 5 of the least miserable countries in the world. At this point, you must be wondering, what is the point of discussing this index? How does it help any country? Fact is that this miserable index is a good tool to compare countries. It tells us a lot about where people are happy versus where they are, well, miserable. The countries doing well are not just for holiday inspiration, though we won't hold it against you. They can tell us a lot about how to achieve countrywide happiness. We can compare metrics, learn more about mitigating misery, and understand how growing inflation, political turmoil, and unemployment have drastic socio-economic consequences, one that can lead to constant distress, enough to top a misery list. This is the one list you'd not want to top. Because while misery might love company, you'd be much better off without it.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.